Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin tonight in the Northwest Territories, where the community of Fort Providence is reeling after a tragedy this weekend. There was a fatal shooting in the hamlet early Saturday morning. Sarah Komolowski has the latest.
3 people were shot in a Fort Providence home this weekend. 1 was killed, 2 others were injured. RCMP say both are still in hospital and 1 is in serious condition. All 3 people who were shot were residents of the community. RCMP say no one has been arrested yet. Police believe the shooting was related to the drug trade. The suspect is believed to have fled and may be out of the territory. The MLA who represents Fort Providence says the incident has shocked the whole community.
People are terrified. They're scared. They don't know what's going to happen next.
Yakalaya says the Fort Providence Community Hall will be open all week for anyone who needs to talk. She says local leaders are also working on a plan to address crime and addictions in the community. Fort Providence leaders will talk to residents about that plan at a community meeting later this week. Sarah Komolowski, CBC News, Yellowknife.
An 18-year-old Quebec man has been charged with murder in connection with a homicide in Fort Good Hope, NWT, last month. RCMP arrested Sacha Benna in Montreal last week. He's accused of murdering a 29-year-old Fort Good Hope man in his home on February 24th. Police say Benna has been brought back to Yellowknife. They say he was identified as a suspect early in the investigation. The RCMP believe he was in Fort Good Hope to sell drugs. The investigation is ongoing. Healthcare dominated question period at the Yukon Legislative Assembly today. Both opposition parties grilled the Minister of Health and Social Services over the government's work to recruit and retain doctors. The scrutiny comes as the Yukon government prepares to negotiate a new agreement with the territory's physicians. Joseph Ho reports.
Like everywhere else in the world, the Yukon needs doctors. Many Yukoners are waiting for one, and the Yukon Party's health critic Brad Cather says the Liberal government needs to step up with recruitment. How? He says by cutting red tape, boosting incentives, and poaching doctors from the U.S. who might be looking to leave the country.
Frankly, to take advantage of the chaos south of the border to welcome U.S. doctors and other health professionals who might like to move to the Yukon to actually come here.
Cather says American doctors are trained to a similar standard as Canadian ones, and he says the government should act quickly to let them practice in the Yukon without jumping through too many hoops. NDP leader Kate White agrees that these doctors could be ripe for the picking.
The proof is not in the pudding right now, right? So I think there's an opportunity to pivot or to branch out and to go particularly hard for U.S. trained medical professionals right now, and not stop the rest. But the reality is we haven't seen, this big rollout as described by the minister.
Now, Tracy Ann McPhee is the Minister of Health and Social Services. She says the government is trying to recruit healthcare workers regardless where they come from. She also points to her department's record $692 million budget as a sign that the government is taking this issue seriously. She says millions have been spent on recruitment and retention.
It is a top priority for us to take every action possible to improve our healthcare system, to improve the care for Yukoners. We know that some of that has been based on the growth of more people living in the territory, and some of it has been based on the expansion of services for Yukoners.
The questions from the opposition come as the Yukon government is about to enter negotiations with the Yukon Medical Association. The Yukon government says a new MOU will focus on key priorities like improving access to care, physician pay, and physician rights. Joseph Ho, CBC News, Whitehorse.
A Yellowknife MLA wants to create a separate collective agreement for nurses. Shauna Morgan tabled a private member's bill on the issue in the NWT legislature last week. Right now, nurses are part of the Union of Northern Workers. They fall under the same agreement as people who work in other areas of the public service. Morgan says a separate agreement could help with the retention of nurses.
Well, what we see in some agreements in other parts of Canada where nurses do have a separate collective agreement, in most cases they would have their own union. sometimes conditions or terms are worked into an agreement around, for example, safe staff to patient ratios, or limitations on consecutive shifts, limitations around overtime that would make it both safer for the worker, but also safer for the patient and the system as a whole. And we're also seeing, the kinds of incentives and bonuses that right now it can be very difficult to work into an agreement when it either has to cover everyone in the public service, including 9-to-5 office workers, or it might be worked in as sort of a one-off, for example, a labor market supplement, but that's not something that would be guaranteed to be continued.
Morgan says she's consulted with nurses who support the idea. She also spoke with the Union of Northern Workers, and she says it has some concerns, specifically that a separate agreement could divide workers and weaken bargaining power. The spring sitting of the NWT Legislative Assembly wrapped up last week, and it sits again in May. Love over hate. That was the message at a rally earlier today in Whitehorse. About 24 people gathered in front of the Yukon legislature. They were there to show support for Kate White. The Yukon NDP leader has been the recent target of vandalism and death threats. Earlier this month, her truck was spray painted and her tires were slashed. Here's what people at the rally said about White.
Kate's a staple in our community, and she's done so much for the Yukon people. And it's sad to see that people are resorting to violent threats and vandalism, and to see her scared like that. That's not our people. That's not what Yukoners should be.
It's not our community. We shouldn't be resorting to violence and threats against people just for opinions. I thought it was dumb. The hate? Really? At this time and age? Really? I didn't think it existed. Still existed here, but it does.
I tell you, it's a whole lot easier to push back against bullying when you've got community who's willing to come out to support you. And so it was beautiful to see people, and I recognize that it's not a me thing. The incident wasn't about me, but knowing that community is pushing back against that behavior is really important. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for,
A mineral exploration company has resumed drilling in a controversial area near Whitehorse. Gladiator Metals is back at Cowley Park. The company was fined $43,000 for infractions at the same site in 2023. The drilling has renewed concerns from nearby residents, but the territorial government says there's nothing stopping the company from drilling again. Virginie Ann has the story.
Here, it simply is not appropriate. People's lives and their homes are going to be impacted heavily.
The president of the Cowley Creek Neighborhood Association says she's more than alarmed, not only about the fact Gladiator Metals resumed drilling in the area, but also about their proposed plan for mining exploration all around Whitehorse.
Everything from these claims flows downhill to the river. And there's no way to know when you're drilling what you're affecting. I think an awful lot of Yukoners right now have deep concerns about mining in the territory in general. There hasn't been a project of any size that hasn't left a huge mess in 100 years.
Baltimore witnessed from a front row seat the destruction of Cowley Park in 2023. At the time, Gladiator Metals was fined $43,000 for mining infractions. The company is now back at the site to do more drilling. It said in a statement, this is only phase 1 of a larger project to drill in the Whitehorse Copper Belt area. That includes Cowley Park, Mary Lake, and McIntyre Creek. All the proposed areas are within city limits, near residential areas. Baltimore is calling for a moratorium on all activities until the Mining Act is updated.
Regulation isn't even able to adequately fine people when they go beyond the level of the current permitting. And what they're able to do in level 3, it will destroy Cowley Park.
An official with the Yukon government says the current legislation doesn't take into consideration companies' past history, even if they were previously fined.
Honestly, it's really difficult operating under the regulations and legislation that we have right now because they're fairly outdated. With Gladiator, you could argue that while they had violations initially, they've shown since then that they can do work without that, without violating the conditions. It's hard for us to then say, no, you can't have another authorization when they've done everything that was asked of them.
The Yukon Environmental and Socioeconomic Assessment Board is currently reviewing Gladiator's proposal. The company is hosting an open house at Whitehorse Golf Course next week. Virginie Anne, CBC News, Whitehorse.
Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is laying out his party's priorities to Northerners. Singh was in Iqaluit this weekend and spoke on several topics, including national defense, tariffs, and Canada's new Prime Minister. Singh says he's committed to Arctic defense, but he says purchasing equipment from the United States is not in Canada's national security interest. He says the NDP would cancel a contract with the U.S. to deliver F-35 fighter jets to Canada. His alternative is to look for companies here to build those jets. Singh says northern infrastructure projects like the Grays Bay Road and Port would be the NDP's top priority for Arctic defense.
You can't make the North strong in terms of defense unless the North is strong in terms of community and infrastructure. We cannot separate the two. So we have to find the investments to build up the North to be able to defend it, but also to support the communities. We believe those two are deeply connected, and we will find the ways to make those investments.
Singh also took questions about the government repealing the consumer carbon tax. Mark Carney scrapped the divisive program in one of his first moves as Prime Minister on Friday. Singh says there's been a lack of understanding of how the tax would affect certain regions.
We can't have one size fitting all because people are in very different circumstances. The challenges in the North are very different from the South, and the reliance now, without any other alternative, on diesel fuel to power communities is a reality for the North. That's not something that is accounted for in the current plans that are put forth.
Singh told reporters the focus of the tax needs to turn to industrial polluters, and there needs to be more accountability to reduce emissions. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says his government would cut the industrial carbon tax if elected. He says it would make Canadian products more competitive. But experts warn the country would then have no chance of hitting its emission targets. Kate McKenna has those details.
Pierre Poilievre says if he's elected, all carbon pricing is on the chopping block.
Today I'm announcing that a common sense Canada First Conservative government will repeal the entire carbon tax, including the federal backstop that requires provinces impose industrial taxes.
On Friday, Prime Minister Mark Carney said he'd kill the consumer carbon price. Now Poilievre says he'd get rid of the industrial price too.
There will be no taxes on consumers, no taxes on Canadian industries.
Most provinces have their own systems. Poilievre says they can keep them if they want. He also says he would expand eligibility for tax credits aimed at clean technology.
While the Liberals tax businesses who use energy, Conservatives will cut taxes and boost incentives for those who bring down emissions. Carrot, not stick.
But the Canadian Climate Institute says industrial carbon pricing is the biggest driver for reducing emissions.
If we got rid of the industrial carbon price today, our emissions would rise the equivalent of about 15 million cars. So yeah, we're not going to hit our targets if all the provinces and the feds get rid of it.
I would say it's bad economic policy for Canada. It's terrible environmental policy. I mean, it basically says let the big polluters pay, not pay. That they can actually pollute for free. And if you actually believe in climate change, it is important for us to actually take action. This is one of the key levers to do that.
Some business experts welcome the idea of more tax incentives.
The more predictability we have and the more incentives we have is a good thing. But of course, it's all about the details.
Poilievre says his plan would make business more competitive, but it could have long-term consequences. European countries are planning a tariff on nations that don't have carbon pricing, meaning companies could be forced to pay a carbon tax, but to a foreign government, not our own. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Prime Minister is expected to be in Iqaluit tomorrow. It's Mark Carney's first domestic trip since taking office, and it comes on the heels of his first international trip in the role. Carney's visit to Nunavut is related to Canada's sovereignty in the Arctic. The Prime Minister will be meeting with Nunavut Premier PJ Akiaguk and the local Rangers Patrol Group. Earlier this month, Defense Minister Bill Blair announced that Iqaluit is one of 3 northern communities where a military hub will be built. The hubs are expected to cost a total of $2.67 billion.
The claims period for 2 classes in the First Nations Child and Family Services and Jordan's Principal Settlement is now open.
First Nations children who were removed from their homes on reserve between April 1st, 1991 and March 31st, 2022, and their caregiving parents and caregiving grandparents can now submit a claim for compensation.
There are free supports to help you fill out your form.
And mental health and wellness supports if you need them.
Learn more and submit your claim at fnchildclaims.ca.
Having 2 kids in diapers impacts every part of our lives. The Canada Child Benefit allows us to give our boys extracurricular activities. It opens their world.
Find out if you qualify at canada.ca/everydollar-counts.
Forced and coerced sterilization of Indigenous people is still happening. The Survivors Circle for Reproductive Justice has supports available for Indigenous survivors. Join the National Registry and access up to $70,000 in healing support funds for individuals, families, and communities. The deadline to apply is March 31st. If you or someone you know has experienced forced and coerced sterilization, please call 1-877-386-0750 or visit reproductivejusticesurvivors.ca for more information.
When you're able to take the next step and invest in yourself and your future, that brings a ton of security.
Definitely something we never thought we'd be able to get if it wasn't for the home buyers plan.
Find out if you qualify at canada.ca/everydollar-counts.
GST, HST credit, I wasn't expecting a lot back, but when I did check my account randomly and I seen it there, I was like, oh wow, it's a nice little surprise. Just getting that little extra, it means a lot.
Find out if you qualify at canada.ca/everydollar-counts.
The government of the Northwest Territories says it could evict smokers who don't comply with a new ban on smoking in all new public housing contracts. The CBC's Nadir Hashmi has more.
Eliminating smoking in our own units will have a positive health outcome for our residents and reduce asset damage.
The Northwest Territories Housing Minister says they are moving to ban smoking in government-owned public housing units. Kaptana says Housing NWT will start working with local housing organizations to implement the change. Housing NWT operates about 2,500 public housing units across the Northwest Territories.
Smoking will not be permitted in all new buildings and in any new or amended leases for existing public housing and market rentals.
Recent data says 28% of Northwest Territories residents reported smoking in 2023. This is substantially higher than the national average. Kirsten Murphy is a Housing NWT spokesperson. In an email to CBC, she says the Territory is the last jurisdiction in Canada to implement such a ban. She says they'll roll out the changes gradually, starting with smoking bans and new tenancy agreements, which will take effect in the next few months. Murphy says the second phase may include a policy-based approach for a blanket smoking ban. They will consult local housing organizations in Northwest Territories before setting a date for Phase 2. Murphy says enforcement won't include fines for those who violate the smoking bans. She says tenants will receive a written warning and a notice of non-compliance. In severe cases, Murphy says Housing NWT may seek eviction. Lisa Thorber-Tesso is the founder of the NWT Tenants Association. She agrees the ban will benefit public health. Thorber-Tesso worries about unintended consequences.
This is going to be more reasons to evict people.
A public housing tenant in Tuktoyaktuk NWT says he supports the plan. As a non-smoker with 2 children, he says it's a step in the right direction.
I say that's pretty good for the long run anyway.
The government says the aim is to reduce second-hand smoke, fire hazards and higher maintenance costs. Nadir Hashmi, CBC News, Yellowknife.
There's hope that a $97 million payout as part of a tobacco settlement will help lower smoking rates in Nunavut. An Ontario court approved the settlement involving 3 tobacco companies earlier this month. The lawsuit was brought forward because of the harm caused by tobacco use and the costs to the Canadian healthcare system. The CBC's Mahnor Mubarak tells us more about Nunavut's plans for the money.
The money coming to Nunavut is meant to go towards health care.
That could be programs to help people stop smoking or greater support for cancer survivors in the territory. Ukwet South MLA Joe Savikatak welcomes the news. In 2021, the community of Ukwet spent $8 million on tobacco products that year alone.
Hopefully some of that funds can be used to curtail the smoking habits of Nunavut, as it's pretty high.
Nunavut is leading the country in the rate of tobacco use. That's according to the Minister of Health's 2023-2024 report, which looked into tobacco and cannabis use. Rob Cunningham is a lawyer with the Canadian Cancer Society. He says that the new funding coming into the territory can be invested in tobacco control.
It's tremendously concerning, and smoking and its relationship with lung cancer is fundamental. And Nunavut has higher lung cancer rates than anywhere else in Canada. So the more we can prevent youth from starting, the more we can help people quit smoking, the more we can improve health of Nunavut.
John Main is the Minister of Health. He says that while the settlement money comes as good news, no amount of money will make up for the harm caused to Nunavummiut.
You know, I'm sorry that no amount of money will ever take away that harm that's been done. It's never going to bring back people we've lost. And the sad fact is, tobacco continues to do an incredible amount of harm in Nunavut.
Though he hopes the funds will result in better health outcomes for Nunavummiut. Mahanur Mubarak, CBC News, Iqaluit.
The new air terminal in Kimrut, Nunavut is officially open. The Kimrut Air Terminal building is the first of several new facilities built to enhance Nunavut's airport network. Community members came together to celebrate the occasion. Carl Cardinal has more.
After some financial challenges, the government of Nunavut secured additional funding to complete Kimrut's $12 million air terminal. There were speeches, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, plus a feast at the local school. David Johannessi is the Minister of Community and Government Services. He called the opening a significant milestone.
It's been a great event to be here. I'm so happy that the community welcomed us, and this event was a great success.
Local elder Elisabeth Ituluk agrees with Johannessi. She says the new terminal was long overdue.
We've waited many years. I'm proud of it and happy for the community. We've waited a long time.
Minister of Economic Development and Transportation David Agiakuk says more terminals are on their way. Noyat and Kugluktuk are among those on the list.
Kimrut is the first one to officially open here. There are other 5 airport terminals that we are working on.
The new terminal in Chesterfield Inlet will be the next one to open, and it is expected in the coming weeks. Carl Cardinal, CBC News, Iqaluit.
3 decades ago, a Yukoner built a runway in Antarctica. And now a book about that runway has landed back on the southern continent. Antarctica Runway tells the story of Keith Byram and his firm Pelly Construction. In 1990, it won a contract with the British government to build an airstrip on a tiny peninsula of Adelaide Island, roughly 1,600 kilometers south of Cape Horn. The book was co-written by Byram and Patricia Cunning of the McBride Museum in Whitehorse. On Saturday, a copy of the book was presented in Antarctica by Thomas James of Natural Resources Canada. It was given to Alex Roots, this year's winter station leader at the Rothra Research Station. A Canadian expedition is trying to get a sense of what's happening below the ocean surface in the Antarctic. They're investigating the impact of freshwater glaciers melting into the sea as the continent warms. Susan Ormiston was there to see the team from New Brunswick at work.
No one ready there, Gordon.
Correct, this bridge. You have permission to launch the USV when ready, over.
Science at sea is a heart-pumping project.
Get that hook up!
With the Navy crew trying to launch Kevin Wilcox's remote-controlled boat.
Once we get free, we'll take her back.
But our boat gets too close to the bow.
Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!
Sorry about that. We were getting right underneath the transom. I didn't want anybody's head getting hit.
The unmanned surface vehicle is part of the University of New Brunswick's Ocean Mapping Group. It even has a mascot, Pingachu.
So ping like a sonar? The
Most important is the sonar that's underneath. And so that essentially sends a pulse of sound down to the seafloor.
100 times a minute, creating a picture of the bottom of the sea.
So we have a map over here that has data that's been collected from other groups. So I'm essentially going to be driving the USV back and forth and essentially painting in this area of the seafloor.
As the Antarctic warms and the glaciers dump more fresh water into the salty seawater, scientists want to know what happens to ocean life. This work fits into a bigger picture. Only about 25% of the world's oceans are mapped, and there's a push on to get it all done. But as you can see, it's incremental and challenging. On shore, it may not look like much, but this connects to an undersea cable, part of an observatory which reads the ocean's vitals, temperature, pressure, and salinity every day.
And so that was put in by Ocean Networks Canada in a collaboration with the Spanish for this location.
The Yellow Explorer is working away. The seabed map is starting to fill in, but suddenly, trouble.
Surprisingly, there's kelp here, which...
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. And so that got caught up in my motors, essentially. And we've cleared that, but unfortunately, they're still not responding.
Attempts to fix it fail. So it's back to Mothership to triage the problem. And he still has to get his vehicle back on board the Margaret Brooke.
Okay, heads up in the boat.
USV is clear of the water.
Safely stored. Turns out it was just a fuse. He's relieved.
All the challenges, I'd do it all over again.
Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Espanola Cove, Antarctica.
More than 200 cross-country skiers flocked to the White Pass this weekend for an event right along the Canada-US border. The Buckwheat Ski Classic took place on Saturday. The annual race is organized by a team from Skagway, Alaska, and draws participants from Alaska, BC, and the Yukon. The theme for this year's Ski Classic was Under the Sea, and there was a competition for best costume, of course. With ongoing tensions between Canada and the US, organizers were fearing a possible boycott, but that wasn't the case, and a last-minute rush of support saw a total of 266 participants. And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
One good scheme deserves another.
Stay on him.
I feel we may be in for a challenging few days.
Cheers. Cheers.
Alcoholics Anonymous. For more information, visit aa.org.
Stream anytime. CBC News.